This video was made possible by the generous support of my patrons. If you would like to join them in helping grow this channel, you can do so at the links in the description below. Vladimir Lenin's Left-Wing Communism, an Infantile Disorder, was written in 1920 as a critical intervention into the early international communist movement, right at a time when the Bolsheviks were consolidating Soviet power and revolutionary movements were spreading across Europe. Addressed to the newly formed Communist International, the text serves as both a theoretical guide and a strategic manual, warning against the twin dangers of right-wing opportunism and ultra-left dogmatism. Lenin critiques the left communists in Germany and Britain for rejecting parliamentary participation, trade union work, and tactical compromises, errors that isolate revolutionaries from the working masses and weaken the movement against capitalism. Lenin maintained that while each country must wage proletarian struggle according to its unique conditions, there are also universal lessons to be drawn from the Soviet experience. At a time when socialist revolutions in Europe were failing due to strategic miscalculation, this text became a crucial document for shaping the discipline, flexibility, and mass engagement necessary for successful proletarian revolution. More than a historical reflection, Lenin's text remains a key work of Marxist strategy, offering enduring insight into the necessity of revolutionary leadership, tactical maneuvering, and engagement with the realities of political struggle. The Russian Revolution of 1917 was initially seen as a historical anomaly, a unique event shaped by the specific conditions of Russia's economic and political backwardness. Many believe that the proletarian revolution in advanced capitalist countries would bear little resemblance to the Russian experience. However, as the revolution unfolded, it became clear that its significance extended beyond Russia itself by serving as a model for future revolutions across the world. The international relevance of the Russian Revolution is not simply a broad theoretical idea, but a historical inevitability. The revolution's fundamental features, such as the seizure of state power by the working class, the establishment of Soviet-style governance, and the rejection of bourgeois parliamentary democracy, are bound to be repeated on a global scale. As Lenin says, "We now possess quite considerable international experience, which shows very definitely that certain fundamental features of our revolution have a significance that is not local, or particularly national, or Russian alone, but international." However, while Lenin maintains that the Russian model serves as a guiding example, it is important not to overstate its universal applicability. He cautions against assuming that all revolutions will unfold exactly as they did in Russia, predicting that once a proletarian revolution succeeds in more advanced capitalist countries, Russia will no longer be seen as the model. Soon after the victory of the proletarian revolution in at least one of the advanced countries, a sharp change will probably come about. Russia will cease to be the model and will once again become a backward country in the Soviet and socialist sense. Despite its global significance, many prominent socialist leaders in Western Europe failed to recognize the significance of the Russian Revolution. Figures such as Karl Kautsky in Germany and Otto Bauer and Friedrich Adler in Austria not only misunderstood the historical moment, but actively worked against it. Lenin harshly criticizes them for this position, stating that they have failed to understand this, which is why they have proven to be reactionaries and advocates of the worst kind of opportunism and social treachery. Lenin points out that the irony here is that Karl Kautsky himself had once recognized Russia's revolutionary potential. In 1902, Kautsky wrote an article for Iskra titled "The Slavs and Revolution," where he predicted a shift in revolutionary energy from Western Europe to Russia. He said that, at present time, it would seem that not only have the Slavs entered the ranks of the revolutionary nations, but that the center of revolutionary thought and revolutionary action is shifting more and more to the Slavs. Kautsky further argued that Russia's revolutionary movement could revitalize the declining revolutionary fervor in Western Europe. He said that the Russian revolutionary movement that is now flaring up will perhaps prove to be the most potent means of exercising the spirit of flabby Philistinism and coldly calculating politics that is beginning to spread in our midst. Kautsky's analysis was particularly insightful, given that for much of the 19th century, Russia had been seen as a bastion of reactionary politics. But he saw past this history and argued that this dynamic had reversed. Russia has long ceased to be a bulwark of reaction and absolutism. I think the reverse is true today. Western Europe is becoming Russia's bulwark of reaction and absolutism. Lenin remarks that 18 years ago, Kautsky not only had a firm grasp on Russia's revolutionary situation, but understood European capital and the political elites to be the greatest obstacles to the Russian revolutionary movement. Yet despite this, Kautsky later rejected the Bolshevik Revolution and became one of its fiercest critics. Lenin underscores the indispensable role of iron discipline within the Bolshevik Party as the cornerstone of political victory and the establishment of proletarian dictatorship. He argues that the Bolsheviks' ability to maintain power throughout 2.5 years of civil war and counter-revolutionary attacks was possible because of the party's rigorous discipline and unwavering support by the working class. Lenin emphasizes that the proletariat seizure of state power is not merely a political transition, but a life-and-death struggle against the bourgeoisie, a far more powerful enemy whose resistance intensifies after their overthrow. He argues that the bourgeoisie's strength lies not only in its international connections and support of global capital, but also in the pervasive influence of small-scale production, which continually regenerates capitalist relations and bourgeois tendencies. This makes the proletariat's task of maintaining discipline and centralization all the more critical. He says that the discipline of a revolutionary party depends on 3 key factors. Number 1, the class consciousness, dedication, and resilience of the proletarian vanguard. Number 2, its ability to connect with and integrate itself with the broader working masses, especially the proletariat, but also non-proletarian workers. And number 3, the correctness of its political leadership, strategy, and tactics, as demonstrated by the practical experiences of the masses. Without these conditions, party discipline cannot be genuinely established and will deteriorate into empty rhetoric. These conditions can only develop through sustained struggle and experience, guided by a correct revolutionary theory that evolves through real mass movements rather than rigid dogma. Lenin attributes the Bolsheviks' success in building and maintaining discipline to 2 prevailing historical conditions. First, Bolshevism emerged on a solid foundation of Marxist theory, which had been tested and refined through decades of revolutionary struggle in Russia. From the 1840s to the 1890s, progressive Russian thinkers, exiled by the brutal Tsarist regime, allowed Russian revolutionaries to develop a deep understanding of international revolutionary movements and to assimilate advanced revolutionary ideas from Europe and America into Russian practice. Lenin notes that Russia's acquisition of Marxism was the result of half a century of unparalleled torment and sacrifice, making it the only correct revolutionary theory for the proletarian struggle. Second, Bolshevism underwent 15 years of unparalleled practical experience during which it navigated a wide variety of revolutionary forms, legal and illegal, peaceful and violent, open and underground, parliamentary and terrorist. No other country experienced such a rapid and diverse succession of revolutionary struggles in such a short period. This rich and varied process, combined with the backwardness of Russia and the severity of Tsarist oppression, accelerated the development of the revolutionary movement and allowed the Bolsheviks to implement and adapt the most advanced tactics from global revolutionary practice. The 1905 revolution was an intense ideological and political ferment. The impending revolutionary storm was felt across society, and all classes were preparing for the coming struggle. The political exiles abroad debated the theoretical foundations of the revolution, while within Russia, the 3 main class forces, liberal bourgeoisie, petty bourgeois democrats, and proletarian revolutionaries, engaged in fierce ideological and tactical battles. These debates laid the condition for the mass struggles that followed, with the press serving as a battleground for shaping the political and ideological weapons of the revolution. The 1905 revolution marked the first major test of these ideological and tactical positions. All classes came into open conflict, and the strike movement reached unprecedented levels, evolving from economic demands to boycotting parliament and eventually armed insurrection. The Soviets, as organs of working-class power, emerged spontaneously during this dress rehearsal, where the alternation of legal and illegal tactics, the relationship between the proletariat and the peasantry, and the debates over the role of the Soviets were all tested. Lenin asserts that without this dress rehearsal, which foreshadowed Bolshevik victory, the October Revolution of 1917 would have been impossible. However, when the 1905 revolution was defeated, the revolutionary movement entered a period of reaction. Tsarism reasserted control, and the revolutionary parties were decimated. Depression, demoralization, and ideological confusion set in, with many revolutionaries turning to mysticism or abandoning the struggle altogether. However, Lenin argues that this period of defeat was also a time of learning. The revolutionary parties, particularly the Bolsheviks, learned the importance of strategic retreat and the need to combine legal and illegal work. It was, as Lenin said, a lesson in historical dialectics, a lesson in an understanding of the political struggle, and in the art and science of waging that struggle. It is at moments of need that one learns who one's friends are. Defeated armies learn their lesson. The period from 1910 to 1914 saw a gradual revival of the revolutionary movement, spurred by events such as the Lenin massacre of 1912. The Bolsheviks, through a combination of illegal work and the use of legal opportunities, regained their influence among the working class. In this regard, Lenin emphasizes the importance of tactical flexibility, noting that the Bolsheviks were compelled to participate in the reactionary Duma and other legal organizations to maintain their revolutionary core while reaching a broader audience. The Bolsheviks would have never succeeded in doing this had they not followed the correct tactics of combining illegal work with the utilization of legal opportunities. The outbreak of World War I exposed the bankruptcy of the Second International, as most socialist parties betrayed the proletariat by supporting their own bourgeois governments. Lenin highlights the Bolsheviks' unwavering internationalist stance, which set them apart from social chauvinists and opportunists of the Second International. He notes that the Bolsheviks' ability to expose the treachery of these parties and maintain a clear revolutionary line was crucial to their eventual victory. He writes that one of the principal reasons why Bolshevism was able to achieve victory in 1917 to 1920 was that since the end of 1914, it has been ruthlessly exposing the baseness and vileness of social chauvinism and Trotskyism. The February Revolution of 1917, which overthrew Tsarism and established a bourgeois republic, marked the beginning of a new phase in the revolutionary struggle. Within a few days, Russia was transformed into a democratic bourgeois republic, freer in war conditions than any other country in the world. However, even at the height of Russia's revolutionary movement, the Mensheviks, social revolutionaries, and Second International continued to deny the significance of the Bolshevik model or Soviet rule. Bolshevik victory was the result of decades of theoretical development and practical experience, which allowed them to navigate the complexities of the class struggle and emerge victorious. Lenin emphasizes that certain lessons were crucial for Bolshevik success and have universal applicability that must be replicated elsewhere, such as the ability to combine legal and illegal work, adapt to changing circumstances, and maintain a clear revolutionary line. Experience has proven that on certain very important questions of proletarian revolution, all countries will inevitably have to do what Russia has done. Lenin identifies two primary enemies Bolshevism faced within the working class movement: opportunism, which evolved into social chauvinism during World War I, and petty bourgeois revolutionism, which often took on anarchist tendencies. He argues that these two forces, though seemingly opposed, complemented each other and posed significant challenges to the revolutionary proletariat. Lenin says that opportunists within the working class movement betrayed the proletariat by siding with their own bourgeois governments, justifying imperialism and war under the guise of defending the fatherland. Opportunism's transformation into social chauvinism during World War I was Bolshevism's principal enemy and was not confined to Russia but was a global phenomenon, as seen in the actions of leaders within the Second International, such as Kautsky and the German Social Democrats. The second tendency that the Bolshevik Party had been struggling against since 1903 was petty bourgeois revolutionism, less well known internationally, but equally significant. This tendency was often infused with anarchist ideas and appealed to small proprietors and the petty bourgeoisie who suffered under capitalism and were prone to revolutionary extremes. But it lacked the discipline, organization, and steadfastness required for a sustained proletarian struggle. As Lenin says, a petty bourgeois class driven to frenzy by the horrors of capitalism is a social phenomenon which, like anarchism, is characteristic of all capitalist societies. However, this revolutionary fervor is unstable and often leads to submission, apathy, or even support for bourgeois fads. Lenin explains that the Bolsheviks had to wage a long and ruthless struggle against this tendency, particularly as embodied by Russia's Social Revolutionary Party, which rejected Marxism, embraced individual terrorism, and imitated the opportunism of European social democratic parties. Lenin notes that anarchism often emerged in reaction to the opportunist betrayals of the working class, with the two tendencies complementing each other rather than working against each other. In Russia, anarchist influence was relatively weak during the revolutions of 1905 and 1917, partly due to the Bolsheviks' uncompromising struggle against opportunism, but also partly because anarchism had already been discredited in Russia during the 1870s. Lenin highlights the Bolsheviks' ability to navigate complex challenges through tactical flexibility and a clear understanding of when to advance and when to retreat. He points to the Bolsheviks' participation in reactionary parliaments and legal workers' organizations as a necessary tactic to maintain the revolutionary core of Bolshevism during periods of reaction. In 1908, the left Bolsheviks were expelled from the party for refusing to participate in a reactionary parliament, basing their stance on the successful 1905 boycott. In 1905, the Bolsheviks had called for a boycott of the Tsar's consultative parliament, which was soon overthrown by the revolution. However, Lenin argues that the boycott was only correct because of the specific revolutionary conditions at the time, including mass strikes escalating into an uprising. But without similar conditions in 1908, the refusal to participate was a mistake. The boycott proved correct at the time, not because non-participation in reactionary parliaments is correct in general, but because we accurately appraised the objective situation, which was leading to the rapid development of the mass strikes, first into a political strike, then into a revolutionary strike, and finally into an uprising. It would, however, be highly erroneous to apply this experience blindly, imitatively, and uncritically to other conditions and other situations. Lenin also addresses the question of compromises, arguing that not all compromises are equal and that revolutionaries must distinguish between those that are principled and those that amount to betrayal. He uses the example of the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, which the Bolsheviks signed under duress to buy time and preserve the revolution, contrasting it with the treacherous compromises made by the Mensheviks, social revolutionaries, and leaders of the Second International who sided with their own bourgeois governments against the proletariat as they actively collaborated to suppress the revolutionary movement. One must learn to distinguish between a man who has given up his money and firearms to a bandit so as to lessen the evil they can do and to facilitate their capture and execution, and a man who gives his money and firearms to bandits so as to share in the loot. Lenin begins by analyzing the German communist opposition, which criticizes the Communist Party's leadership role in the proletarian dictatorship. They ask, who is to exercise dictatorship, the Communist Party or the proletarian class? Lenin counters that such a question demonstrates incredibly and hopelessly muddled thinking, and argues that their position is confused and impractical. He insists that class struggle is led by political parties, which in turn are directed by experienced leadership groups. The German opposition's attempt to contrast the dictatorship of the leaders with the dictatorship of the masses ignores the reality that revolutionary organization is necessary to wield power effectively. Moreover, Lenin contextualizes this ideological deviation within broader historical patterns. He references Marx and Engels' analysis of Britain's labor aristocracy, explaining how privileged sections of the working class can produce opportunist and reformist tendencies. But at the same time, he notes that the ultra-left opposition represents the opposite extreme, an impractical purism that isolates revolutionaries from the working class. This rejection of political compromise and strategic maneuvering results in sectarianism, preventing meaningful revolutionary progress. A centralized communist party is not an authoritarian imposition, but a necessary structure for leading a successful revolution and ensuring the proletariat's long-term victory. Lenin criticizes the German lefts for their use of fashionable terms and failure to draw actionable lessons from the imperialist war, but particularly focuses on their refusal to engage in reactionary trade unions or parliament. The German left communists dismissed many trade unions as counter-revolutionary and advocated instead for the creation of new, pure workers' organizations. Lenin rebukes this position, calling it fundamentally wrong, built on empty phrases, and insisting that revolutionaries must work within existing structures to win over the masses rather than isolate themselves in ideological purity. Lenin argues that engagement in trade unions is not a matter of compromise, but a strategic necessity. He explains that the Communist Party's influence in Russia is maintained through a network of trade unions, Soviets, and non-party workers and peasants' conferences. These institutions, though not inherently communist, function as channels through which the party educates and mobilizes the proletariat. Without the close involvement of trade unions, the Bolsheviks would not have been able to maintain their rule or carry out the highly complex and diversified work in the form of propaganda, agitation, and frequent conferences. Lenin further critiques the German lefts, as well as the IWW, for their abstract, idealist approach to revolution, arguing that socialism must be built with the human material bequeathed to us by capitalism, rather than expecting the immediate emergence of a proletariat free from ideological remnants of the past. Trade unions, despite many of their reactionary elements, remain indispensable schools of communism, where workers learn class struggle through practice. He says that a fully communist society is still a distance away, and the remnants of a capitalist society will remain for a period, and therefore, expecting all trade unions to reach full communist maturity overnight would be akin to teaching higher mathematics to a child of 4. Lenin concludes by calling on the Communist International to condemn the German left's position, warning that their refusal to engage with reactionary unions plays into the hands of the bourgeoisie. He insists that revolutionaries must be willing to endure persecution, employ strategic maneuvers, and even work covertly if necessary to reach the masses. Abandoning the unions would be the greatest service communists could render to the bourgeoisie. The German left communists maintain that participating in parliamentary struggle is obsolete and represents a reversion to outmoded forms of political engagement, which Lenin also dismisses as both arrogant and misguided. He points out that Germany has not yet established a Soviet republic, making the notion of a reversion meaningless. Without an alternative structure of proletarian governance in place, abandoning parliamentary engagement amounts to political isolation rather than revolutionary progress. He acknowledges that bourgeois parliamentarism is in decline from a historical standpoint, but warns against prematurely discarding it as a viable field of political struggle. Contrary to the opinion of such outstanding political leaders as Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, the German lefts, as we know, considered parliamentarism politically obsolete. Even in January 1919, we know that the lefts were mistaken, and therefore it is for the lefts to prove why their error, indisputable at the time, is no longer an error. But they do not and cannot produce even a shred of proof. a political party's attitude towards its own mistakes is one of the most important and surest ways of judging how earnest the party is and how it fulfills in practice its obligations towards its class and the working people. Frankly acknowledging a mistake, ascertaining the reasons for it, analyzing the conditions that have led up to it, and thrashing out the means of its rectification, that is the hallmark of a serious party. That is how it should perform its duties, and how it should educate and train its class, and then the masses. Lenin argues that the key flaw in the German left's reasoning is that they mistake their ideological perspective for the objective conditions of the masses. Millions of German workers still support bourgeois parties, while the rural proletariat remains largely counter-revolutionary. Given this reality, the Communist Party must work within bourgeois institutions, including parliaments, to expose their limitations and bring revolutionary consciousness to the workers. The transition from capitalism to socialism requires a long and persistent fight, during which participation in bourgeois institutions can be an essential means of mobilizing the masses, and rejecting such participation is to abandon the very proletariat that communists aim to lead, leaving them under the influence of reactionary forces. Bolshevik experience provides a clear lesson on the necessity of engaging in parliamentary struggles. The Bolsheviks participated in elections in the Russian Constituent Assembly in late 1917, both before and after the October Revolution. Far from legitimizing bourgeois democracy, this tactic helped expose the limits of bourgeois parliament and prepared the masses for its eventual dissolution. Lenin also extends this critique to the Dutch left argument that says that parliamentary participation is undesirable in revolutionary situations. The Dutch thesis claims that parliamentary action loses importance during a revolution and that abstaining from parliament may be necessary when it becomes a counter-revolutionary organ. Lenin dismisses this stance as both historically and logically unsound, viewing this as opportunism and an emotional rather than strategic response. He emphasizes that even in reactionary parliaments, revolutionary participation can be beneficial, citing the Bolshevik experience in Russia, where parliamentary engagement helped prepare for the socialist revolution. Moreover, he warns against reducing valid revolutionary ideas to absurdity by overextending them. He stresses the necessity of engaging in difficult struggles, including utilizing reactionary parliaments to expose bourgeois illusions and win over the working class, particularly in Western Europe, where bourgeois democratic prejudices remain strong. By establishing a communist presence in these institutions, revolutionaries can confront reactionary forces directly and educate the masses about the need for Soviet power. Ignoring this tactical necessity, however, would leave the bourgeoisie unchallenged and allow them to maintain control over working class consciousness. The German left communists also embrace a rigid rejection of compromises, which Lenin sees as a fundamental misunderstanding of Marxist strategy. The refusal to engage in strategic compromises, he argues, is not revolutionary but rather a form of political immaturity that weakens the proletariat's ability to wage an effective struggle against capitalism. Drawing from Engels' critique of the Blankist communards, Lenin highlights the fallacy of believing that communism can be achieved merely by rejecting intermediate stages and compromises. The Blankists identified themselves as communists because they wanted to attain their political goals without stopping at intermediate stations without any compromises, which they believed would automatically lead to the immediate establishment of communism. Following Engels, Lenin applies this critique to the German lefts, emphasizing that historical development inevitably produces compromises, and the task of Marxists is not to reject them outright, but to engage with them critically and tactically. Lenin points out that workers, especially those involved in strikes, understand the necessity of compromises. A strike settlement may not achieve all demands, but it does not signal a betrayal. The key distinction lies between compromises that arise from material necessity and those that represent a surrender to bourgeois interests. Revolutionaries must be able to differentiate between the two and avoid dogmatic rejection of all political maneuvering. It would be absurd to formulate a recipe or general rule to suit all cases, and that rejecting compromises outright is strategically disastrous. In revolutionary struggle, the proletariat often finds itself in a weaker position compared to the bourgeoisie, which possesses extensive international support and economic resources. To succeed, the proletariat must exploit divisions among the bourgeoisie, form tactical alliances, and maneuver skillfully rather than adopt a rigid and inflexible approach. By refusing all compromises, the German left fails to recognize that temporary agreements with wavering elements can help to isolate reactionary forces and strengthen the working class's position. Those who do not understand this reveal a failure to understand even the smallest grain of Marxism, of modern scientific socialism in general. Bolshevik history, Lenin argues, is filled with examples of tactical compromises. Before and after the October Revolution, the Bolsheviks engaged in alliances and maneuvers with various political forces, including peasant groups, Mensheviks, and even bourgeois liberals when it served the larger goal of revolutionary success. At key moments, such as the signing of the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, the Bolsheviks accepted painful compromises to safeguard the revolution. This kind of strategic flexibility is essential for any revolutionary movement aiming to win power and maintain it in the face of counter-revolutionary threats. Lenin insists that revolutionary strategy must be based on a clear understanding of shifting political forces and the need to influence broad masses of workers rather than on rigid sectarianism. The left's rejection of engagement with the independent Social Democrats is a case in point. While the independent Social Democrats contained opportunist elements, it also attracted workers moving leftward from the mainstream Social Democratic Party. Instead of engaging with these workers and winning them to communism, the German lefts dismissed them altogether, weakening their own movement and leading them into political isolation. Lenin notes that capitalism creates a diverse and stratified working class, with various intermediate groups between the proletariat and small property owners. This complexity necessitates that the Communist Party adopt flexible tactics, including conciliation and compromises, to unify and elevate proletarian class consciousness and revolutionary potential. The Bolsheviks successfully used such tactics against the Mensheviks both before and after the October Revolution, strengthening their position while isolating opportunist leaders. Finally, Lenin critiques the German left's refusal to recognize the Treaty of Versailles, which demonstrates an inability to distinguish between principled opposition and tactical necessity, as well as an overall naive approach to international politics. Lenin posits that if a Soviet Germany were to emerge, it might need to temporarily recognize the treaty, just as Soviet Russia had to accept the Brest-Litovsk Treaty under duress. To refuse any such recognition in advance is to surrender flexibility and hand the initiative to the bourgeoisie. The political landscape of early 20th century Britain saw the emergence of a strong and rapidly growing communist movement among the working class. While no unified communist party had yet been established, several socialist organizations, including the British Socialist Party, the Socialist Labour Party, the South Wales Socialist Society, and the Workers' Socialist Federation, were engaged in negotiations to form such a party. According to the Workers' Dreadnought, a publication edited by Sylvia Pankhurst, the aim was to create a communist party that would align with the Third International, reject parliamentarianism in favor of the Soviet system, and endorse the dictatorship of the proletariat. However, significant divisions existed among these groups, particularly on the question of parliamentary participation and whether the Communist Party should affiliate with the Labour Party, which was dominated by the trade unions. The Workers' Socialist Federation and the Socialist Labour Party rejected parliamentary elections and affiliation with Labour, viewing the British Socialist Party as the right wing of the Communist parties for its willingness to engage in electoral politics. These divisions mirrored similar debates in Germany, though the context and historical conditions in Britain differed. One of the most vocal critics of parliamentary participation was the Scottish Workers' Council, which argued that parliamentary participation would enable reactionary leaders to consolidate power. Any support given to parliamentarianism is simply assisting to put power into the hands of our British exploiters. The position of the Scottish Workers' Council reflected a broader frustration with reformist leaders and a desire for revolutionary alternatives rooted in direct workers' control. However, Lenin critiques this rigid anti-parliamentarian stance, warning that while revolutionary enthusiasm is essential, it must be coupled with strategic political engagement. He acknowledges that the Scottish Workers' Council expresses a noble and working-class hatred of the bourgeois class politicians, but that politics is an art and science that requires tactical maneuvering. Lenin's central argument is that the British communists should participate in parliamentary action and help workers experience firsthand the failures of labor's reformist leadership. He states that, to lead the way without compromises, without turning, this slogan is obviously wrong if it comes from a patently impotent minority of workers. He suggests that if Labour, under Henderson and Snowden, assumes power, their inevitable failures will disillusion workers and push them towards communism. Thus, communist participation in elections would serve to support Henderson in the same way that a rope supports a hangman. This strategy aligns with Lenin's broader theory of revolutionary change, which holds that mass consciousness shifts through political experience rather than propaganda alone. He emphasizes that revolution is impossible without a change in the views of the majority of the working class, a change that is brought about by direct engagement in political struggle. He also highlights the importance of exploiting divisions among the ruling class, revealing the bourgeoisie's growing fear of labor's rise. If communists tactically support labor against the conservatives, they can accelerate both labor's exposure as a failed reformist force and the working class's shift towards revolution. Lenin advocates for a conditional electoral agreement between communists and labor, where they would jointly oppose the conservative-liberal alliance while maintaining complete communist freedom of agitation and critique. If labor accepts, communists gain a platform, but if they refuse, it exposes them as unwilling to break with capitalism. Either outcome benefits the communist cause. In one of the most economically backward capitalist countries, the Russian bourgeois revolution of 1905 marked a significant turning point in world history. During the first month of 1905 alone, the number of strikes was at an unprecedented scale, reaching 10 times the annual average of the preceding decade. By 1917, strikes continually increased in magnitude, culminating in the mass political upheaval that led to the October Revolution. Under unique historical conditions, Russia not only demonstrated the spontaneous mass participation of the oppressed classes in a revolutionary period, as seen in all major revolutions, but also revealed the profound role of the proletariat. Despite its relatively small size in comparison to the total population, the proletariat combined economic strikes with political strikes that ultimately escalated into armed struggle. Furthermore, the birth of the Soviets, a novel form of mass organization and struggle, signaled the emergence of a new political structure in opposition to capitalism. The history of the working class movement reveals that in all countries, communism continues to engage in an essential struggle against two principal adversaries, opportunism and left-wing communism. This global ideological struggle, as seen in the struggle between the Second and Third International, is a testament to the international nature of proletarian revolution. The rapid rise of communist movements in advanced capitalist states, as well as the Third International's decisive victory, underscores the need for communism to balance an adaptive approach to achieving fundamental aims. The failure of the Second International was not only due to its reformism, but also its inability to provide centralized and effective leadership for the global proletariat. The Third International must avoid this mistake by applying Soviet power and proletarian dictatorship in ways that respect economic, political, and cultural distinctions while identifying concrete transitional stages to advance the revolutionary cause. The ideological alignment of the proletarian vanguard with Soviet power marks a crucial achievement, but victory demands more than ideological commitment. The broad masses of the working class must actively support the revolution, or at the very least adopt a neutral stance that prevents them from siding with the bourgeoisie. This transition cannot be accomplished solely through propaganda. It must emerge from the masses' direct political experience. The historical law of all great revolutions, confirmed in both Russia and Germany, dictates that workers must first witness the impotence, treachery, and servility of social democratic leaders before fully embracing communism. The immediate objective of the communist movement is to bridge the gap between the vanguard and the broader proletariat. The task of communist leadership is to guide apathetic workers, disillusioned by bourgeois democracy, toward revolutionary action. The first step, the ideological defeat of opportunism, has been achieved. The second step, the mass mobilization of workers, demands the rejection of leftist rigidity and a commitment to strategic flexibility. The correct movement for insurrection arises when the ruling class is in crisis, the bourgeoisie is divided, the petty bourgeoisie has discredited itself, and the proletariat has developed the determination necessary for a decisive confrontation. At this point, hesitation is fatal. Political conflicts among bourgeois factions may seem trivial from the standpoint of pure communism. However, in practical revolutionary politics, these divisions are crucial for communists to exploit in order to accelerate the downfall of social democratic opportunists and ensure that the workers learn from their betrayal. Revolutions are never entirely predictable. History is more complex, dynamic, and multifaceted than any theoretical model. The revolutionary class must therefore master every available form of struggle, both legal and illegal, depending on changing political conditions. Rigid adherence to either form is a mistake, as true revolutionaries must adapt their methods to shifting circumstances. It is easy to be a revolutionary when mass upheaval is underway, but the real challenge lies in advancing the revolutionary cause under non-revolutionary conditions, including within reactionary institutions. Britain presents a compelling case. No one can predict the precise catalyst that will ignite proletarian revolution in Britain, whether it be a parliamentary crisis, imperialist contradiction, or other unexpected factor. However, communists must be prepared on all fronts. The experience of the French Dreyfus affair, which nearly provoked civil war, illustrates how seemingly minor political events can lead to mass upheaval. The task of communists in Britain, therefore, is to penetrate all spheres of social life, parliamentary elections, labor unions, colonial struggles, and infuse them with revolutionary content. In wake of the Russian Revolution, the international bourgeoisie has been thrown into crisis. The panic of the ruling class, evidenced by anti-communist crackdowns across Europe and America, reveal the deep-seated crisis of imperialism. Terrified of Bolshevism, it has resorted to frenzied repression. But ironically, this reactionary overreach to suppress revolution aids the communist struggle by drawing unprecedented attention to Bolshevism and inadvertently accelerating its spread. The world revolution, accelerated by the crises of imperialism and war, is progressing rapidly, providing both the opportunity and the necessity for flexible, strategic action. Through this, the communist movement can overcome left-wing extremism and achieve global victory for Soviet power and proletarian dictatorship, but such rapid transformation of political conditions demands a flexible approach. Revolutionary victory will be secured not through rigid formulas, but through a creative application of communist principles to an ever-changing reality.